I think the appropriations process is very close to being wound down.
This is Washington dysfunction. I'm deeply disappointed we find ourselves with this state of affairs nearly halfway through the current fiscal year.
The government shutdown is looming. Joining me now with fresh reaction from the White House is the Hill's Brett Samuels. Brett, are lawmakers back here in Washington, D.C. going to be able to avoid a government shutdown, or have we eclipsed the battle?
You know, it seems like this is a question that we've been asking, every week basically for the last month or so. Will there be a government shutdown as lawmakers continue to punt these deadlines? Once again, it seems like lawmakers are really coming up right to the edge of this deadline. They have until Friday at midnight. Now, lawmakers did reach an agreement in principle on some key sticking points, particularly on the Department of Homeland Security. So essentially, they've, if they can keep their house in order, if there are no last-minute sticking points, which we saw happen over the weekend, then it does appear they should be able to get this done before the government shuts down. But what one White House official pointed out to me is that, if lawmakers are very close to a deal, if they can get it done Saturday morning, there could be a way to, essentially keep the government open for those extra few hours if needed. But certainly they're pushing right up against the deadline.
And up against their 2-week vacation. The House returned today for a 4-day work week before a 2-week recess. I mean, do they ever work? But anyway, that's another show for another day. Will they advance Ukraine aid in this short window?
It's looking unlikely, Kevin. Speaker Johnson has said that he wants to prioritize government funding. And as we just pointed out, that is essentially going to dominate the week. They're going to spend all week trying to pass government funding to avoid a shutdown at the end of the week. And then they'll head off for this 2-week vacation. So Ukraine funding, which White House officials have said is increasingly urgent, they need it right now. It's already been too late that they've had to wait for this additional funding. It doesn't appear that that's going to get done in the House for at least a couple of weeks. And then, of course, there's the question of whether the House will pass what the Senate passed already a few weeks ago, or if the House will pass sort of a standalone Ukraine supplemental, which will then have to go through the House, through the Senate, and then to the White House. But certainly it seems like we'll have at least a couple of weeks before we get any kind of resolution on Ukraine funding.
All right, heading to the Middle East, from Ukraine to the Middle East, President Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, how'd that meeting go? They've had a tense relationship.
Tense is definitely right. And I think that would be an apt word to describe this phone call. White House officials telling me that President Biden really made himself clear that an invasion of Rafah in Gaza would be a mistake, which, of course, Israeli officials have proposed and have looked to carry out some kind of military operation in Rafah. So President Biden certainly making himself clear on this phone call. And, of course, remember this phone call came about a month after Biden and Netanyahu last spoke. And in that time frame, we saw Biden on a hot mic after the State of the Union say that him and Netanyahu were going to have this come to Jesus meeting. Biden telling MSNBC that Netanyahu was hurting Israel more than helping Israel with his handling of the war against Hamas. So certainly a lot of friction in this relationship. And we'll see what happens next week when Israeli officials are set to come to Washington, D.C. to meet with White House officials and discuss plans for this potential Rafah invasion and what U.S. officials would like to see happen instead of a full-fledged military campaign.
And back on the campaign trail, new Decision Desk HQ analysis has warning signs for President Biden in Georgia. How's the re-elect reacting to him trailing Trump in Georgia?
So campaign officials with the Biden campaign have told me, they're under no illusion that this is going to be a cakewalk. They know that this is going to require a really strong effort, daily effort, investments. They point to their massive cash advantage over the Trump campaign as one benefit where they can really invest in these states like Georgia. But as you said, Decision Desk HQ data showing Trump leading by about 5 percentage points in Georgia, a state that Biden only won by about 10,000 votes in 2020. So certainly there's an expectation that the Peach State is going to be really closely contested. And the Biden campaign has to work on, not just rebuilding its coalition there, but really making sure that their voters are motivated to actually come out and vote in November against Trump.
It was the first time in decades that a Democrat won that state back in 2020. So no doubt Republicans want to see that back in the R column. And it looks like what the case down there, the election interference case, is having the reverse effect that Democrats had hoped, and that Republicans are more excited, more likely to be mobilized as a result. Long way between now and Election Day, but excellent reporting and analysis as always. The Hill's Brett Samuels. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Former President Donald Trump can't make bond. Trump's lawyers told the court that he is unable to come up with the $464 million bond in the civil fraud cases about his business dealings in New York. Joining me now to keep tabs on Trump's legal docket, the Hill's Zach Schonfeld. Zach, what happens if Trump can't make bond?
Well, that's all up to 3 judges on a New York appeals court. Donald Trump has asked this court to step in and put this all on hold. But without further action, as of next week, Letitia James, New York's attorney general, can step in and start taking enforcement action, like trying to seize his famed properties like Trump Tower. So at the end of the day, it's up to these courts of whether they want to step in and save the day for Donald Trump, because he said without their action, there is no way he can post this full amount.
This is a wild concept to me, Zach. You've been covering these court cases for years. When you look at Trump Tower specifically, you mean to tell me that there could be a scenario before Election Day where Trump Tower, the iconic Trump Tower in New York City, home of The Apprentice and all that stuff, could be seized and the lettering could come off of Trump Tower? Am I hearing you correctly?
That is a very real possibility, which is why if you look to all these filings that Donald Trump's lawyers have been putting in court, they have been missing no words, just talking about, these impacts that it would have. Donald Trump has been writing on Truth Social that he'd have to host a fire sale of his properties to try to put up the cash, to get collateral, to try to get this bond, to try to stave off Letitia James taking, as you're saying, would be just this extraordinary step of stepping in and trying to take on his properties.
And meanwhile, what's the latest forecast on the Stormy Daniels case?
Well, Donald Trump's Monday right now, not only does he have this deadline to post this bond, he also has a big hearing in that case. So up until a few weeks ago, this was destined to go to trial on Monday. This was set to be Donald Trump's first criminal trial out of any of his cases. But as things often do in Trump world, things suddenly changed. Now we're going to have a hearing on Monday where we're hoping to get some answers as to some new documents that have come to light from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's unclear why these documents didn't come to light earlier. The parties have been trading blame. So the judge is going to hold a hearing to sort it all out. But meanwhile, he's put the trial on delay until mid-April and is going to decide whether it needs to be delayed even further.
All right, and Trump's going after George Stephanopoulos on ABC.
That's right. I woke up this morning and there was a new Trump lawsuit. And this one now against both ABC News and George Stephanopoulos. This one is over an interview that happened a few weeks back on This Week, ABC News' Sunday show. George Stephanopoulos was interviewing Nancy Mace, the Republican Congresswoman from South Carolina, about her endorsement of Trump. And Stephanopoulos was pressing her on the recent E. Jean Carroll verdicts, finding Donald Trump liable for sexual abuse and defamation. And in his questioning, Stephanopoulos at multiple points said that the jury had found Donald Trump liable of rape, which is technically not true. So Donald Trump filed this new lawsuit saying that was defamation.
Trump's also calling for Liz Cheney's prosecution. This list just keeps growing, but the latest on Liz Cheney.
Yeah, this is nothing new, right? But these attacks between Donald Trump and Liz Cheney, they've been going back all the way to the January 6th committee hearings. And every new time we get some, news in the cycle, this time it's both Peter Navarro, Trump's former White House aide, going to jail over contempt of Congress charges related to the January 6th committee. Also, House Republicans on Capitol Hill have been investigating the investigation and have been putting out some new stuff. So every time this all comes up, we see a new round of Truth Social posts from Trump, as well as his campaign speeches going after Liz Cheney and the rest.
This headline caught my eye. There's something about a lawsuit that Trump's filing or considering to file against a former aide in a Secret Service limo. What's the latest on this?
Yeah, so that's all similar to the Liz Cheney stuff and the fact of this investigation into the investigation. There was a report put out by House Republicans, and in it talked about this contentious testimony that happened back in those January 6th committee hearings, back when Cassidy Hutchinson had testified that Donald Trump, after giving that speech on the ellipse on January 6th, had went back in his Secret Service limo and had lunged for the steering wheel. But now this unnamed driver, according to this new report from House Republicans, is contesting that testimony. So as you might imagine, Donald Trump is making a new round of attacks against both Cassidy Hutchinson, Liz Cheney, and also, even some of the people involved in his security detail, it seems.
You forgot George Stephanopoulos. Of all the cases that you're covering, that you're following, what's the one that your Trump sources tell you that they're most concerned about having an impact on the upcoming election. My sources tell me that it's really the January 6th case in Washington, D.C. that they're most nervous about of all of them. What are your sources telling you?
I think that's right on. I think both that case as well as some of the others, basically the three cases that are not the hush money case, as Donald Trump's sources close to him that I've spoken to seem to be more concerned about those charges. But at the same time, they seem really confident that those cases are not going to trial before the election. It seems as of right now, it very well might be that this hush money case in New York, that's pretty much agreed by everybody is the least legally serious of Donald Trump's criminal cases, might be the only one that we get a verdict in before November.
If Trump wins in November, do all these cases go away? That's a question I get asked a lot, just from folks outside of the industry. Do all of these cases just completely go away and he's clear if he wins?
That's the plan. He'll do two different things. So in the federal indictments, he can either pardon himself or he can just go ahead and fire special counsel Jack Smith. The two state cases, on the other hand, the hush money case and then the Georgia election case, he has no authority to actually go in and fire Fani Willis or do anything like that. But instead, what will happen is his lawyers will start arguing that a sitting president cannot be criminally prosecuted while in office. So the plan there is to delay those cases so they would go to trial in 2029 at the earliest.
Wow. Well, you'll be employed through 2029 then, maybe. Thank you to Zach Schonfeld, The Hill's legal reporter. Excellent work, Zach. Very, very impressive reporting. Great job.
Good to be with you.
Trump's influence is on the line in Ohio today during the state's GOP primary for Senate to see who will take on Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown in the fall. Trump is backing Bernie Moreno, a former car dealer and blockchain entrepreneur. But State Senator Matt Dolan has cast himself as an anti-MAGA candidate, and he's hoping to deal a blow to Trump's grip over Ohio politics. Recent polling has shown a dead heat between Moreno and Dolan, and tonight's results could be a potential bellwether for Republican sentiment in a general election. The United Nations Food Agency is warning that famine is imminent in northern Gaza. The World Food Program issued a new report finding that 1.1 million people have exhausted all of their food supplies, and they're now facing catastrophic hunger and starvation. President Biden announced that the U.S. is building a temporary port along the coast of Gaza to help bring additional aid. The report urged Hamas to allow for outside humanitarian aid groups to enter into Gaza, also calling on Israel to do the same. Of the 300 envoys needed to provide relief, only 9 have been allowed to enter in, according to the UN report. Hong Kong's legislature unanimously passed legislation that further aligns its national security interests with China's Xi Jinping. The legislation would further squash dissent amongst Hong Kong citizens who speak out against the government, which has shifted since 2020 to pro-communist China's worldview. In 2020, large-scale pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong rattled Beijing. Dozens of political opponents have already been jailed, and democracy watchers say the new legislation, dubbed Article 23, will only embolden Hong Kong's pro-Xi authorities. Former Trump advisor Peter Navarro has reported to federal prison in Miami. Navarro's last-ditch bid to avoid prison as he appeals was rejected by Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts earlier this week. The former Trump advisor was found guilty of 2 counts of contempt of Congress after refusing to comply with a subpoena from the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack at the Capitol. Navarro will serve 4 months in federal prison. And before we go, a quick congrats to our friends over at C-SPAN who are celebrating 45 years today. And of course, to the legendary Brian Lamb. That's it for today's Daily Debrief. My name is Kevin Cirilli. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.